Hi, I have a story for you today. Now, you've recently had some instructions on storytelling, which is when you've practiced a story many times, trying to learn it by heart, and saying it in different ways. Well, I've practiced saying this story 3 times, so this will be my 4th time. I'll see how much of it I remember. Maybe this is a story that you would like to learn by heart as well. I'll put it in our lessons as a document for you to read. This is the story of the Protozoa. Can you imagine that there is an animal that is so small that it's made up of only one cell? That's just like a flake of your skin, or even smaller, because many times you can't see these animals with your naked eye. You need a microscope just to see them. They're called Protozoans, and this name comes from 2 Greek words meaning first animals. They live in fresh water everywhere, so we could call them ubiquitous. They take oxygen out of the water, which just seeps into their cell. They don't have lungs or gills, like birds or fish do, to get their oxygen. Also, they eat very small things like bacteria. Again, they don't have a mouth. They're too small, but they have a gullet area on their cell where the food just goes in. Somehow it travels through that one-celled body, knowing just where to go. And finally, the undigested remains go out the cell wall. There is no circulation system because that kind of system is only needed in multi-celled animals, where things are transported from cells to cells. One thing that is really interesting about these creatures is how they move. They do it in different ways, but not by means of limbs or of any different groups. Since they have just one cell, sometimes that cell is covered in short little hairs called cilia that move rapidly and propel the animal. Animals with cilia can have several hundred or even 1,000 on that one cell, and it would be very hairy looking. This is how the paramecium moves. Animals with this movement are put into the class Ciliata, from the Latin word cilia, meaning eyelash. Some one-celled animals move by things that are called flagella. These are long hairs of protoplasm that are extremely thin and whip-shaped projections. These flagellum beats in a circular path just like a spiral, and it acts as a propeller. Some flagellata have only 1, and some have up to 4. The group of animals that move in this way are in a class called Mastigophora, which means whip bearers, or flagellata. Many of these animals are parasites and they carry diseases. Another way these one-celled animals move is by the shifting of protoplasm within their cells. It works like this. At any point on the surface of the cell, the protoplasm protrudes or sticks out, creating a lumpy-like foot on the surface of the cell. Soon, more and more of the living protoplasm flows from the rest of the cell into that lumpy foot projection, which is called a pseudopod or a false foot, causing it to move. And in a few minutes, the mass of the cell may have thus reached a new location. Amoebas move in this way. Their name of their class is called Sarcodina, from the Greek word sarcodes, meaning fleshy. When these animals reproduce, they do it in such a simple way. One way is that they just split into 2, becoming 2 new organisms. You could say they become the daughters of themselves. This way of reproducing is called fission. Another way is called conjugation. This is where two organisms run into each other and mash together to become one. Imagine it would create a new young animal. But think about it. It would reduce the population drastically, and that wouldn't be so good for them, would it? But don't worry, pretty soon this new creature begins to split into two, and those two begin to split, making four, and so on in this way. The population doesn't decrease. One-celled animals are small, but they're really very interesting. Why don't we go collect some in the pond water and observe them? This was a story that was given to me by one of my teachers who taught me. And she's very smart, and she has lots of interesting stories about animals. Now, one thing I noticed is that there was lots of different ways that they reproduce. There was fission, there was conjugation. There was also different ways that they moved. Think about that way that it was describing how it would stick out a foot. And then it would kind of grow into that area until it all moved in that one different place. That was the pseudopod. But then there were other ones, the Flagellata, that have the tiny whip-like things that would move like this. And then the Ciliata, which move with a lot of little hairs sticking out around them, like eyelashes. Do you think you could draw some of these different ways that the protozoa move? Or maybe you could draw the different ways that they reproduce. Why do you think a protozoa would need to move in the first place? Where is it going? Is it trying to get away from something, or is it trying to move towards something? It's all very interesting. Maybe you can come up with a story of how the protozoa have to stay at home until everyone can be well and they're not worried about getting sick anymore, and what the protozoa get up to during that time of staying at home. Some of these protozoa are on our timeline of life, so I'll include a picture of the timeline of life in this lesson so that you can see them. But I'd also like to see what you think they might look like. Remember, they're very small and they're very hard to see. So come up with a story or an illustration of these different things. You could make a chart of the different way they move, or the different types that there are, and information about them. You can try and memorize this story, or write a story that's similar to this one. There's lots of interesting words in here. Maybe you can look at those and try and define them, and you can make your own special dictionary of the protozoa. There's so many fun ideas of what you can do with this story. I can't wait to see what you decide to do.